The executive boardroom of Titan Energy fell silent as Mason Parker slammed the geological survey report onto the polished conference table. "That worthless desert ranch you've been trying to buy? It's sitting on an oil reserve worth over $8 million. CEO Richard Blackwood's face drained of color as the geologist continued. "And the farmer who got it for $500 at a tax auction, the same man whose grandfather you forced off that land 50 years ago, is now the only thing standing between you and the biggest deal of your career." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's video reveals a twist that will leave you speechless. The merciless Texas sun beat down on the cracked earth of Dry Creek County, where nothing seemed to grow except desperation and debt. For most of the local farmers, another year of drought meant another step closer to foreclosure. But for Ethan Caldwell, this barren landscape represented something entirely different: opportunity. Ethan wiped sweat from his weathered brow as he studied the crude property map spread across the hood of his dusty pickup truck. At 36, he carried himself with the quiet determination of someone who had weathered both literal and figurative storms. His faded jeans and work-worn hands told the story of a man who had never taken the easy path, even when one was offered. "You sure about this, Ethan?" asked Sheriff Jim Holbrook, keys to the padlocked gate dangling from his fingers. The older man's expression conveyed equal parts concern and curiosity. "County's been trying to unload this place for years. Nothing but rattlesnakes and bad memories out here." "I'm sure," Ethan replied, his voice carrying the calm certainty that had become his trademark in the farming community of Riverdale, 20 miles east. $500 for 300 acres is a deal, even if it's just rocks and dirt. "It's your funeral," the sheriff shrugged, unlocking the rusted chain that had kept trespassers off the abandoned Wilcox Ranch for nearly a decade. "Though what a man who's already got productive farmland wants with this godforsaken patch is beyond me." As the gate swung open with a protesting groan, Ethan climbed back into his truck and drove onto the property that was now officially his. 300 acres of seemingly worthless desert that had been seized for back taxes after its previous owner had abandoned it years earlier. The dilapidated ranch house stood like a sun-bleached skeleton on the horizon, its broken windows staring blankly at the approaching vehicle. Ethan parked and surveyed his new acquisition with eyes that saw possibility where others had seen only desolation. The purchase had raised eyebrows throughout Riverdale, where Ethan was known as a practical, methodical farmer who had transformed his family's struggling 50 acres into a thriving 200-acre operation through innovation and sheer determination. Why would such a sensible man waste even $500 on this cursed property? The answer lay not in the present condition of the Wilcox Ranch, but in its history, a history intertwined with Ethan's own family in ways few people in Dry Creek County remembered. As he approached the abandoned ranch house, his mind drifted to the stories his grandfather had told him as a child, stories about this very land. "This place belonged to your great-grandfather once," Jacob Caldwell had told a young Ethan during their evening walks along the boundaries of their modest farm. 300 acres of the most promising land in the county before the drought of '52. "What happened to it?" Ethan had asked, always eager for his grandfather's tales of family history. Jacob's face had darkened then, the way it always did when touching on painful memories. "Richard Blackwood's father happened to it. Robert Blackwood owned the bank back. Then, when the drought hit and we couldn't make payments, he foreclosed faster than a rattlesnake strikes. Wouldn't even give your great-grandfather time to sell some cattle to make good." Those childhood stories had planted a seed in Ethan's mind, not of revenge but of restoration. When he'd seen the Wilcox Ranch listed in the county tax auction for a minimum bid of $500, it had felt like fate, offering a chance to reclaim a piece of his family's legacy. Now, as he pushed open the creaking door of the abandoned ranch house, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the broken roof, Ethan felt a sense of connection to the past that transcended the property's current desolation. The interior was a chaotic museum of abandonment, broken furniture, scattered papers, and the ghostly outlines on walls where pictures had once hung. In what had once been the kitchen, a calendar from 2008 still clung stubbornly to the wall, marking the approximate time when the last owner had walked away. Ethan moved methodically through the house, assessing structural damage and mentally cataloguing what could be salvaged versus what would need to be demolished. His phone rang, breaking the eerie silence. Sarah Martinez, his farm manager, back in Riverdale, calling with updates on their primary operation. "How's the disaster property?" she asked after running through the day's irrigation numbers. Sarah had been the most vocal critic of Ethan's decision to purchase the Wilcox Ranch, her practical nature recoiling at what seemed a sentimental waste of resources. "Less disastrous than expected," Ethan replied, stepping onto the back porch to escape the stifling interior heat. "The main house needs work, but the bones are solid. Most of the outbuildings are still standing." "And the land itself?" Sarah pressed, knowing that no amount of salvageable buildings could justify the purchase if the soil wasn't viable. Ethan's gaze swept across the barren landscape. "It's been neglected, but that doesn't mean it's dead. I'm heading out to check the old well locations now. Just remember, we've got the Thompson irrigation system upgrade scheduled for next week," Sarah reminded him. "We need your sign-off on the final plans by Friday." "I'll be back tomorrow," Ethan assured her. "This is just a preliminary assessment." After ending the call, Ethan retrieved his geological survey equipment from the truck, while his neighbors saw him simply as a successful farmer. His agricultural science degree and 3 years working for the County Water Management Board had given him skills beyond typical cultivation. His interest in the Wilcox Ranch wasn't just sentimental. He had studied the area's topographical maps and historical water surveys extensively before making his bid. The afternoon sun tracked across the sky as Ethan methodically checked the 3 wells marked on the property map. The first 2 were as expected, dried up and damaged beyond simple repair, victims of both drought and neglect. But the 3rd well, located in a depression behind a rocky outcropping, showed more promise. The old mechanical pump was seized with rust, but Ethan's testing equipment detected moisture at a depth that suggested the groundwater table might still be accessible. More intriguing was the soil composition around this area, unexpectedly different from the surrounding terrain, in ways that made Ethan's scientific mind take notice. As he collected soil samples, Ethan noticed an unusual sheen in the soil that didn't match typical desert composition. He bagged several specimens, labeling each with precise location data for later analysis. His grandfather had always claimed there was more to this land than met the eye. Perhaps the old man's instincts had been right all along. Around 4:30, the distant sound of an approaching vehicle pulled Ethan's attention from his work. Shielding his eyes against the glare, he spotted a sleek black SUV navigating the rutted dirt road with obvious difficulty. The vehicle seemed comically out of place in these surroundings, like a penguin in the desert. The SUV came to a stop beside his truck, clouds of dust settling around its gleaming exterior. The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 30s, her business attire as incongruous with the desolate landscape as her vehicle. She approached with confidence despite her impractical footwear, extending a hand as she reached him. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Jennifer Lane, acquisitions specialist for Titan Energy." Her handshake was firm, professional. "I was hoping to catch you here." Ethan accepted the handshake with measured caution. "Didn't realize news traveled that fast. I've only owned this place for about 6 hours." Jennifer's polite smile didn't reach her eyes. In my business, information about property transactions is valuable, particularly when those properties are of interest to my employers. And why would Titan Energy be interested in 300 acres of what everyone assures me is worthless desert? Ethan asked, his tone casual despite the sudden alertness he felt. May I be frank, Mr. Caldwell? She didn't wait for permission. Titan Energy is planning a major pipeline project connecting our North Basin facilities with processing plants. In the south, the most cost-effective route runs directly through this property. Ethan absorbed this information with outward calm that masked his racing thoughts. Titan Energy was the region's largest oil company, having expanded dramatically under the leadership of Richard Blackwood, son of the same banker who had foreclosed on his great-grandfather's property all those years ago. The coincidence seemed too precise to be chance. We're prepared to make a generous offer, Jennifer continued, misinterpreting his silence as negotiation tactics. $15,000. 30 times what you paid at auction just hours ago. A substantial profit for minimal investment. The offer confirmed Ethan's suspicion that something larger was at play. No corporation offered 30 times market value without compelling reason. That's certainly generous, he replied carefully. But I bought this place with specific plans in mind. I'm not looking to flip it. Jennifer's professional demeanor slipped slightly, revealing momentary frustration before she recovered. Perhaps if you shared your plans, we could discuss how Titan Energy might help facilitate them on another property. $25,000 could purchase considerably more promising land elsewhere in the county. My plans are tied to this specific property, Ethan stated simply, but I appreciate Titan's interest. If I reconsider, you'll be my first call. The finality in his tone was unmistakable. Jennifer handed him her business card with a practiced smile that didn't mask her disappointment. Please do think it over, Mr. Caldwell. This offer won't remain open indefinitely. As the black SUV disappeared down the dirt road, kicking up dust that glowed orange in the setting sun, Ethan's mind worked through the implications of this unexpected visit. Why would a massive energy corporation send a representative hours after his purchase? The proposed pipeline explained their interests superficially, but not the urgency or the inflated offer. Ethan returned to the soil samples he'd collected, examining them more carefully in light of Titan Energy's interest. The unusual composition near the third well took on new significance. He packed the samples carefully in his truck, planning to have them analyzed properly when he returned to Riverdale. Rather than drive back that evening, Ethan decided to spend the night on the property. He unrolled his sleeping bag in the bed of his pickup, the ranch house being too dilapidated for comfortable shelter, and lay beneath the vast canopy of stars that only truly revealed themselves far from city lights. As crickets chirped and the occasional coyote howled in the distance, Ethan contemplated the day's events. The urgent interest from Titan Energy suggested the land held value beyond what was visible on the surface. Combined with the unusual soil composition he'd observed, a theory began to form in his mind, one that would require expert confirmation. Dawn broke with the harsh clarity unique to desert mornings. Ethan rose with the sun, performed a final circuit of the property to confirm his observations from the previous day, then headed back to Riverdale with his soil samples and a growing sense that his impulsive $500 purchase might prove more significant than anyone had imagined. His first stop was not his own farm, but the small laboratory of Dr. Elena Reyes at Riverdale Community College. The geologist had helped Ethan analyze soil conditions on his farm several times over the years, her expertise in regional geology proving invaluable for his agricultural planning. "Ethan Caldwell, what brings you to my lab so early?" Elena greeted him with the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. At 45, she combined academic precision with practical application, making her respected by both farmers and energy companies throughout the region. "I need your expert opinion on some soil samples," Ethan replied, placing his carefully labeled containers on her workbench. "From the old Wilcox Ranch in Dry Creek County." Elena's eyebrows rose. "The abandoned property? What's your interest there?" "I bought it yesterday at the county tax auction," Ethan explained, noting her surprise. $500 for 300 acres. "Most would say you overpaid," Elena remarked dryly. "That area's been written off as agricultural wasteland for decades." "Maybe," Ethan acknowledged, "but I noticed some unusual soil composition near one of the old wells, and Titan Energy seems remarkably interested in land that's supposedly worthless." This last detail caught Elena's full attention. "Titan sent someone to see you already?" "An acquisitions specialist named Jennifer Lane," Ethan confirmed. "Offered me 30 times what I paid, claiming they need the land for a pipeline route." Elena's expression grew thoughtful as she examined the soil samples, her scientific curiosity. "Engaged. Let me run some tests. If Titan's interested, there might be more to these samples than agricultural potential." While Elena worked, Ethan returned to his farm to check on operations and brief Sarah about the developments at the Wilcox Ranch. His farm manager remained skeptical, but was intrigued by Titan Energy's unexpected interest. "Even if it is just about a pipeline route," Sarah reasoned, "you could use that money to upgrade the Northfield irrigation system we've been wanting to improve." "True," Ethan acknowledged. "But why would they offer so much for land that's publicly valued at next to nothing? And why the urgency?" By mid-afternoon, Elena called with preliminary results that confirmed Ethan's suspicions. "Your soil samples show trace petroleum compounds consistent with potential oil deposits," she explained, professional excitement evident in her voice. "Nothing definitive without proper drilling samples, but enough to explain Titan's interest. If they've done satellite imaging of the area." The confirmation sent Ethan's mind racing through possibilities and implications. If the worthless desert land he'd purchased for sentimental reasons potentially contained oil deposits, the modest $500 investment could represent millions in value. More significantly, it meant the land his family had lost decades ago might have been far more valuable than anyone had realized at the time. What would be the next step to confirm these findings? Ethan asked, practical considerations temporarily overriding emotional implications. "Proper geological testing with equipment I don't have access to," Elena replied, "though I have a colleague at the State University who might help us get a clearer picture without involving an energy company yet." The following morning, Ethan returned to the Wilcox Ranch with Dr. Mark Sandoval, Elena's colleague and a specialist in petroleum geology. The professor brought ground-penetrating radar equipment that provided more detailed subsurface imaging than Ethan's basic tools could achieve. As they set up the equipment near the promising third well, Sheriff Holbrook's patrol vehicle appeared. On the access road, the older man approached with the unhurried gait of someone with both official business and personal curiosity. "Bringing in the big guns already, I see," he observed, nodding toward Dr. Sandoval and the sophisticated equipment. "Word around town is that Titan Energy's mighty interested in your new purchase." "News travels fast," Ethan commented, not entirely surprised in a county where significant developments were few and far between. "Especially when Richard Blackwood himself shows up at the county records office asking about your deed transfer," Holbrook replied, the casual delivery belying the significance of this information. "Not often the CEO of Titan Energy takes personal interest in a small property transaction." This detail heightened Ethan's suspicions further. The CEO's direct involvement suggested the property held importance beyond a mere convenient pipeline route. "Any idea why he'd take such an interest?" Ethan asked, watching the sheriff's reaction carefully. Holbrook studied him for a moment before responding. There have been rumors about this property for years. Geological surveys conducted quietly, land assessors visiting when owners aren't around. He gestured toward the equipment Dr. Sandoval was calibrating. Seems you might be about to discover what they've been looking for. After the sheriff departed, Dr. Sandoval completed his survey of the area, his expression growing increasingly animated as the data accumulated on his laptop screen. By early afternoon, he turned the computer toward Ethan with an unmistakable look of excitement. These readings strongly suggest a significant petroleum deposit, he explained, indicating patterns on the geological imaging display. The formation extends at least 200 feet below surface level and appears to cover approximately 40 acres in the eastern section of your property. The scientific confirmation transformed abstract suspicion into concrete reality. The land Ethan had purchased for family history and offered the possibility of astronomical return on investment. More importantly, it explained the urgent interest from Titan Energy and raised profound questions about whether the Blackwood family had known about this potential when they foreclosed on his great-grandfather's property half a century earlier. As Ethan and Dr. Sandoval packed up the equipment, another vehicle approached, not the sheriff's patrol car or Jennifer Lane's corporate SUV, but a gleaming black Lincoln Navigator that projected power and wealth in every sleek line. Even before the driver emerged, Ethan somehow knew who had come to visit his newly acquired property. Richard Blackwood exited the vehicle with the confident authority of someone unaccustomed to obstacles. At 58, the CEO of Titan Energy carried himself with the precise blend of charm and intimidation that had built his company into a regional powerhouse. His tailored suit and manicured appearance seemed absurdly out of place amid the desert desolation, yet he moved with the assurance of someone who considered all territory ultimately his domain. "Mr. Caldwell," he greeted Ethan with practiced cordiality that didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. "I see you've been quite busy with your new acquisition." His gaze swept over the survey equipment and lingered on Dr. Sandoval with barely concealed displeasure before returning to Ethan. "Finding anything interesting?" "Interesting enough that the CEO of Titan Energy makes a personal visit," Ethan replied evenly. "That's quite a step up from your acquisition specialist." Blackwood's smile remained in place, though his eyes hardened slightly at Ethan's directness. "Jennifer mentioned you were attached to this particular property. I thought a more personal approach might be appropriate." He gestured toward the expanse of seemingly barren land. "I understand sentiment, Mr. Caldwell. Family legacies matter, even those that ended badly." The deliberate reference to the historic connection between their families confirmed what Ethan had begun to suspect. Blackwood knew exactly who he was dealing with. "Sentiment is part of it," Ethan acknowledged, "but I'm also curious why Titan Energy is so interested in land that's supposedly worthless." "A pipeline route is hardly worthless to an energy company," Blackwood countered smoothly, "and I'm prepared to increase our offer to $50,000, 100 times your investment, in recognition of your family's historical connection to this property." The significant escalation of the offer crystallized Ethan's suspicions more effectively than any geological survey could have. "And if I told you Dr. Sandoval here believes there might be oil deposits under this worthless land?" For a brief moment, Blackwood's composed facade cracked, a flicker of calculation and concern crossing his features before the confident mask returned. "Speculation based on preliminary survey equipment would be a risky basis for turning down a guaranteed return," he recovered. "Exploratory drilling costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, with no certainty of results. Yet Titan Energy seems willing to pay well above market value to acquire this specific property," Ethan observed. "That suggests your company has information beyond what's publicly available." Blackwood studied him with new intensity, reassessing the farmer he had clearly underestimated. "I'll be direct, Mr. Caldwell. Titan Energy conducted satellite surveys of this region 3 years ago. The results suggested potential deposits worth investigating. The most promising indicators were on this property. The same property that once belonged to my family before your father foreclosed on it," Ethan noted, the historical connection suddenly taking on new significance. "Ancient history," Blackwood dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Business decisions from another era. My interest is purely in current opportunities." He paused, recalibrating his approach. $100,000, Mr. Caldwell. Final offer, contingent on immediate acceptance. The escalation from 25,000 to 100,000 in the space of a single conversation told Ethan everything he needed to know about the potential value hidden beneath this supposedly worthless land. "I think I'll hold on to it for now," he replied calmly. "See what my own exploration reveals." Blackwood's expression hardened, the pretense of friendly negotiation evaporating. Individual landowners rarely have the resources to properly develop oil discoveries, Mr. Caldwell. The costs of drilling, infrastructure, regulatory compliance, they're prohibitive for someone in your position. "Perhaps," Ethan acknowledged, "but I have something you apparently want quite badly. That creates options I didn't have yesterday." As Blackwood returned to his vehicle, the tension in his posture revealed the failed negotiation had unsettled him more than he wanted to show. Before departing, he turned back with one final comment. "Consider carefully before you proceed, Mr. Caldwell. Oil exploration is a complex business with many potential complications, particularly for newcomers." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air as the navigator pulled away, leaving Ethan and Dr. Sandoval in contemplative silence. The confrontation had confirmed their suspicions, while simultaneously raising the stakes beyond what either had anticipated. "He's worried," Dr. Sandoval observed after Blackwood's vehicle disappeared from view. "Really worried, judging by that offer and the barely veiled threat. And the fact that he came himself instead of sending more representatives," Ethan agreed. "The question is exactly how valuable is what's under this land, and what does Titan Energy know that we don't?" As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the property that had suddenly become the center of unexpected power struggle, Ethan knew that his simple quest to reclaim a piece of family history had evolved into something far more significant. The worthless desert ranch purchased for sentimental reasons now represented not just potential wealth, but a chance to balance historical injustice and perhaps uncover truth that had remained buried for half a century. What neither Ethan nor Richard Blackwood could have anticipated was how quickly events would escalate, nor the shocking discoveries that lay not just beneath the rocky soil of the Wilcox Ranch, but in the forgotten records of a past that would soon return to change everything. If this story has captured your attention, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's video reveals exactly what Ethan discovered beneath that worthless land and the shocking connection to the Blackwood family that changed everything. The small conference room at Riverdale Community College fell silent as Dr. Elena Reyes completed her presentation. Based on these core samples, we're looking at a potential oil reserve of approximately 2 million barrels, conservatively valued at over $8 million at current market prices. She turned to Ethan, whose stoic expression masked his internal shock. "And that's just in the eastern 40 acres we've tested. The formation likely extends further. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you're enjoying this real-life David versus Goliath tale, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's video reveals the shocking documents Ethan found hidden in the old ranch house that changed everything. 3 weeks had passed since Ethan's confrontation with Richard Blackwood on the dusty soil of the Wilcox Ranch. Those weeks had been a whirlwind of activity as Ethan leveraged every professional connection and resource at his disposal to understand exactly what lay beneath his $500 purchase. The morning after Blackwood's visit, Ethan had met with his longtime friend and attorney, Miguel Gonzalez, in the modest law office that served most of Riverdale's farming community. "Let me get this straight," Miguel had said, leaning back in his worn leather chair. "You bought an abandoned ranch for $500, and the next day, the CEO of Titan Energy personally offered you $100,000 for it." His expression reflected equal parts skepticism and concern. "And you believe there's oil under the property based on preliminary surveys. Dr. Sandoval's ground-penetrating radar shows geological formations consistent with significant oil deposits," Ethan confirmed. "And Blackwood essentially admitted their satellite surveys identified the same thing 3 years ago." Miguel whistled softly. "If Titan's internal valuation justified a $100,000 offer on day one, we're talking about potential worth far beyond that." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "But Ethan, developing an oil discovery requires resources beyond what most individual landowners can access. Blackwood wasn't wrong about that. I'm not looking to become an oil baron," Ethan replied. "But I need to understand the full value of what I'm sitting on before making any decisions, and I need legal protection while I figure it out." Miguel had nodded, immediately grasping the implied threat in Blackwood's parting words. "I'll file for expedited mineral rights confirmation with the state registry and get a cease and desist order preventing any unauthorized access to your property. We should also look into the history of that land more carefully, particularly the foreclosure that took it from your family." That conversation had set in motion a dual investigation, scientific assessment of the oil reserve and historical examination of the property's complicated past. For the scientific work, Dr. Reyes had assembled a small team of experts willing to work discreetly, using the community college's resources supplemented by equipment borrowed from the state university. The historical investigation had proven equally revealing, though in ways neither Ethan nor Miguel had anticipated. The county archives contained some interesting discrepancies regarding the 1952 foreclosure, Miguel reported during their second meeting. "The loan terms your great-grandfather agreed to were substantially different from what was referenced in the foreclosure proceedings. Interest rates nearly doubled, payment schedules were accelerated, and collateral requirements expanded beyond the original agreement." "You're saying the foreclosure was fraudulent?" Ethan had asked, the implications stirring both anger and vindication for his grandfather's long-held bitterness. "Not provably fraudulent after 70 years, Miguel cautioned, "but ethically questionable at minimum. Robert Blackwood used the drought as opportunity to acquire potentially valuable property through technical default, rather than working with a long-time customer experiencing temporary hardship." This historical context added layers to Ethan's increasingly complex situation. What had begun as a sentimental purchase to reclaim family legacy now represented both potential fortune and possible historical justice. Now, 3 weeks later, the scientific assessment had reached its preliminary conclusion in the community college conference room, where Dr. Reyes presented her findings to Ethan, Miguel, and Sarah. $8 million, Sarah repeated, the number clearly difficult to process. From land everyone considered worthless. "Minimum valuation," Dr. Reyes corrected. "The deposit could be substantially larger. We've only analyzed core samples from the eastern section, which explains Blackwood's increasingly aggressive tactics," Miguel added grimly. He slid a document across the table to Ethan. "Titan Energy filed petition yesterday, challenging the auction process that transferred ownership to you. They're claiming insufficient public notice and improper minimum bid valuation." "They won't win on those grounds," Ethan said with confidence. That surprised the others. I checked the legal notifications personally before bidding. They met all statutory requirements for a tax auction. Miguel nodded. Agreed, but legal merit isn't always the point with these maneuvers. They're trying to cloud your title and create uncertainty while applying pressure from multiple angles. Like the environmental inspection they tried to force last week, Sarah asked. And the sudden county road access survey, Ethan added. Every day brings some new official with paperwork that somehow involves accessing my property. Classic corporate pressure tactics, Miguel confirmed. They're hoping you'll decide the legal hassle isn't worth it and accept their offer, which I'm guessing will increase significantly now that Dr. Reyes has confirmed the deposit's value. Ethan's phone vibrated with an incoming text from Sheriff Holbrook. Titan Energy trucks heading toward Wilcox Ranch. Said they have survey permission from county. Thought you should know. We need to get out there, Ethan said, showing the others the message. They're making a move. The drive to the Wilcox Ranch took 30 minutes at speeds that stretched rural highway safety margins. As they approached the access road, they spotted 2 white trucks with Titan Energy logos parked near the gate, which now sported a brand. New chain and padlock different from the one Ethan had installed. Sheriff Holbrook's patrol car was already on scene. The older man standing between the corporate vehicles and the gate with the patient stance of someone accustomed to diffusing tense situations. Afternoon, Ethan, the sheriff greeted as they pulled up. These gentlemen seem to have misunderstood county access regulations. 3 men in Titan Energy uniforms stood near their trucks, equipment cases visible in the open truck beds. The apparent leader stepped forward with professional confidence that faltered slightly at Miguel's appearance. Mr. Caldwell, I presume. I'm Curtis Weber, senior geological technician for Titan Energy. He held up an official-looking document. We have county authorization to conduct environmental assessment along the proposed pipeline corridor that crosses this property. Miguel intercepted the document before Ethan could respond. This is a general environmental survey permit for county roads and public easements, he observed after quick review. It doesn't authorize access to private property without owner consent. Weber's confident expression wavered further. The county administrator assured us this permit covered necessary access. The county administrator doesn't have authority to grant access to private property, Sheriff Holbrook interrupted. Mildly. Something I explained when I found these gentlemen cutting your lock, Ethan. You cut my lock? Ethan asked, his normally calm demeanor showing rare signs of anger. We replaced it with a new one, Weber offered weakly, holding out a key. We were instructed to secure the site after conducting our survey. Instructed by whom? Miguel pressed. Weber's hesitation spoke volumes. Our operations supervisor relayed instructions from management. Let me guess, Ethan said. Management being Richard Blackwood himself. The technician's uncomfortable shift was confirmation enough. Miguel handed the permit back with practiced professionalism that didn't mask his satisfaction. Please inform Mr. Blackwood that unauthorized access to this property constitutes criminal trespass. Any future attempts will result in immediate legal action against both the individuals involved and Titan Energy as a corporate entity. As the Titan Energy employees retreated to their vehicles, Sheriff Holbrook cut off the unauthorized lock and replaced it with Ethan's original. They're getting desperate, he observed. Switching from legal maneuvers to direct action suggests they're running out of patience, or time. Or both, Miguel agreed. The question is, why now? What's changed in their timeline? The answer arrived the following morning in the form of a regional business newsletter that featured a small announcement. Titan Energy finalizes arrangements for Southern Pipeline Project. Construction to begin within 60 days. That's their pressure point, Miguel observed when Ethan showed him the article. They've committed to construction schedules with penalties for delays. Without access through your property, they'd have to reroute around several geographical Obstacles, increasing costs and pushing back their timeline, Ethan added, the pieces falling into place. No wonder Blackwood's getting aggressive. This gives us leverage, Miguel noted, but also increases risk. A corporation facing deadline pressure has motivation to pursue all available options, legal and otherwise. The attorney's warning proved prescient when Jennifer Lane appeared at Ethan's farm later that afternoon, her corporate polish somewhat diminished by obvious stress. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm authorized to offer you $250,000 for immediate sale of the Wilcox Ranch property," she stated. "Without preamble, 500 times your investment, with expedited closing and all transfer costs covered by Titan Energy." The dramatic increase from the previous $100,000 offer confirmed Miguel's assessment of Titan's growing desperation. Ethan received the offer with outward calm that betrayed none of his internal calculation. "That's a significant improvement on your last proposal. We recognize the property's importance to our timeline," Jennifer acknowledged. "This offer represents fair market value with substantial premium for expedited transfer. Fair market value for land, potentially containing oil reserves worth over $8 million. Ethan countered, watching her reaction carefully. Jennifer's professional composure cracked momentarily, confirming she hadn't been informed of Ethan's knowledge regarding the oil deposit. "I'm not authorized to discuss speculative assessments," she recovered. "This offer relates specifically to the pipeline access requirements." "I see," Ethan replied. "Please inform Mr. Blackwood that I appreciate Titan Energy's improved offer, but remain uninterested in selling at this time. If there's nothing else?" After Jennifer departed, Ethan drove out to the Wilcox Ranch for what had become his daily property check. The attempted trespass by Titan's survey team had heightened his vigilance, with Sarah and several trusted farm employees taking turns monitoring the property throughout the day. The ranch house had become Ethan's primary focus. During these visits, while the oil discovery commanded most attention, his original interest in reclaiming family legacy hadn't diminished. He had begun clearing decades of accumulated debris, salvaging what could be preserved while documenting the property's condition. In what had once been his great-grandfather's office, Ethan had discovered a cache of old documents beneath rotted floorboards, records apparently hidden intentionally before the foreclosure. These papers had revealed disturbing details about Robert Blackwood's systematic manipulation of loan terms for multiple farmers during the 1952 drought, creating a pattern of predatory lending that had consolidated vast tracts of land under bank ownership for pennies on the dollar. Most significantly, the documents included geological survey reports from 1951 suggesting potential oil deposits throughout the region, with the Caldwell property marked as particularly promising. The implications were staggering. Robert Blackwood had potentially orchestrated the foreclosure with knowledge of oil potential beneath the struggling farm. This historical context transformed the current conflict with Richard Blackwood from simple business negotiation into something with deeper moral implications. If the father had acquired the land through questionable means with knowledge of its hidden value, the son's desperate attempts to regain control carried the weight of generational injustice. As Ethan sorted through more documents in the dilapidated office, the sound of approaching vehicles drew his attention. Through the dusty window, he spotted Sheriff Holbrook's patrol car, followed by an unfamiliar black sedan with government plates. Outside, Ethan found the sheriff accompanied by a serious-looking woman in a business suit. "Ethan, this is Catherine Winters from the State Attorney General's office," Holbrook introduced. "She'd like to speak with you about Titan Energy and your property." The unexpected appearance of a state prosecutor elevated the situation beyond anything Ethan had anticipated. "Of course," he responded, leading them to the relatively stable front porch where he had placed salvaged chairs. "Though I'm not sure how I can help the Attorney General's office," Catherine Winters studied him with the measured assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating credibility. "Mr. Caldwell, our office has been investigating Titan Energy for potential violations of state environmental regulations and improper influence over county officials. Your recent interactions with the company have intersected with our ongoing investigation. I've had some unusual experiences with them since purchasing this property," Ethan acknowledged cautiously. "So I've heard," Winters replied. "Sheriff Holbrook contacted our office after yesterday's trespassing incident, which appears to connect to other patterns we've been monitoring." She removed a file from her briefcase. "Are you aware that the county administrator who authorized Titan's environmental survey permit has received substantial consulting fees from Titan subsidiaries over the past 3 years?" Ethan exchanged glances with Sheriff Holbrook, whose expression suggested this was new information to him as well. "I wasn't aware of that connection. We've been building a case concerning Titan's methods of securing rights-of-way for their pipeline project," Winters continued. "Your situation represents a particularly clear example of their escalating tactics when conventional approaches fail." The conversation that followed revealed an investigation far broader than Ethan's individual property dispute. Titan Energy's aggressive expansion under Richard Blackwood had apparently involved systematic efforts to influence local officials, manipulate permit processes, and pressure reluctant landowners through questionable means. "We believe your property represents special importance to Titan beyond simple pipeline access," Winters concluded after outlining the broader investigation. "Their response to your purchase has been disproportionate to typical right-of-way negotiations." "I might have insight into why," Ethan replied after brief consideration. He explained the oil discovery and the historical documents suggesting Robert Blackwood's knowledge of potential deposits before the 1952 foreclosure. Catherine Winters' professional demeanor couldn't entirely mask her excitement at this new information. "This adds significant dimension to our investigation. Would you be willing to share copies of these historical documents and your geological findings?" After the prosecutor departed with copies of both the historical records and Dr. Reyes's preliminary findings, Sheriff Holbrook remained behind. "You just escalated this situation beyond anything Blackwood will be prepared for," he observed. "The AG's office has been looking for leverage against Titan for years. You just handed them a case with both historical and current implications." "I didn't start this fight," Ethan replied. "But I won't back down from it either." "Just watch your back," the sheriff advised. "Blackwood won't take this lying down." The warning proved prophetic the very next morning, when Ethan awoke to urgent calls from 3 neighboring farmers. Overnight, Titan Energy had secured emergency permits to test water quality in the aquifer, serving the entire agricultural region. Permits that authorized immediate drilling operations within 500 feet of Ethan's property line. By noon, massive drilling equipment had been positioned on adjacent properties, with operations running 24 hours under emergency authorization. The official explanation involved potential contamination concerns, but the strategic positioning made the actual purpose clear. Titan was attempting to access the oil deposit from neighboring properties while creating continuous disruption. For Ethan, "They can't directly drill into your oil from adjacent land," Miguel explained during an emergency meeting at Ethan's farm. "That would constitute mineral theft under state law, but they can make your life miserable with round-the-clock operations while collecting additional geological data about the deposit's boundaries. And intimidating my neighbors," Ethan added. 3 have already called asking if I shouldn't just sell and end the disruption." "Classic pressure tactics," Miguel acknowledged grimly. "They're trying to isolate you while gathering more information about exactly what they're fighting for." The situation escalated further that afternoon when Jennifer Lane returned. This time accompanied by Titan Energy's chief legal counsel, Bradford Reynolds, a silver-haired corporate attorney with reputation for aggressive negotiation. Mr. Caldwell, in light of recent developments, Titan Energy is prepared to make a final offer of $500,000 for immediate transfer of the Wilcox Ranch property, Reynolds stated with cold efficiency. This represents our absolute maximum valuation, considering all relevant factors. The tenfold increase from Blackwood's personal offer confirmed the corporation's growing desperation. Ethan maintained composed exterior despite the staggering sum, an amount that would transform his farming operation and secure his financial future beyond anything he had imagined possible from his $500 investment. "And if I decline?" Ethan asked, curious about their prepared response. Reynolds' expression hardened. "Then we proceed with all available legal remedies to resolve access requirements for our pipeline project. I should note that environmental testing operations on adjacent properties will continue indefinitely under our emergency authorization. The impact on local agricultural activities would be unfortunate but necessary." The threat was barely veiled. "Accept our offer or we'll make life unbearable for you and your neighbors while fighting you through every legal channel available." "I'll need time to consider an offer of this magnitude," Ethan replied, revealing nothing of his actual reaction to either the amount or the implied threat. "You have 48 hours, Reynolds stated flatly. "After that, the offer expires permanently, and we pursue alternative approaches to securing our interests." After they departed, Sarah voiced what everyone was thinking. $500,000 would transform everything we're trying to do here. We could upgrade every system on the main farm, expand operations, implement all the sustainability projects we've been planning for years. "And let Blackwood complete what his father started," Ethan responded quietly. "Taking land through manipulation and pressure, knowing it contains value far beyond what's being offered. It's your decision," Sarah acknowledged. "But $500,000 is life-changing money for what started as a sentimental purchase." The following morning brought unexpected development. When Catherine Winters returned, this time with additional personnel from the Attorney General's office, who began documenting Titan's drilling operations on neighboring properties. "We've found irregularities in their emergency authorization," Winters explained to Ethan as they watched the state officials photograph equipment positions. "The water contamination concern they cited doesn't correspond to any reported data or testing results. We're suspending their operations pending full review." By mid-afternoon, Titan's drilling equipment stood silent, a significant victory, though likely temporary given the corporation's resources and influence. The respite allowed Ethan to focus on a new development. Dr. Reyes had called with results from additional core samples that expanded their understanding of the oil deposit. "The formation is larger than our initial assessment," she explained when Ethan arrived at her laboratory. "Based on these new samples, we're looking at potential reserves between 3 and 4 million barrels, conservatively valued between $12 to $16 million at current prices." The revised valuation transformed Titan's seemingly generous $500,000 offer into something approaching exploitation. Even considering development costs and profit margins, the disparity was staggering. "Have you made a decision about their offer?" Dr. Reyes asked, aware of the pressure Ethan faced. "Not yet," he admitted, though these findings certainly clarify the stakes involved. As Ethan drove back toward his farm, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The caller identified himself as Mason Parker, senior geologist for Titan Energy. "Mr. Caldwell, I believe we should meet. There are aspects to this situation you need to understand before making your final decision." The unexpected contact from within Titan's organization raised immediate suspicion. Why would a Titan employee want to meet with me outside official channels? Because what's happening isn't right, Parker replied, surprising Ethan with his directness. I've been with Titan for 15 years. What Blackwood is doing now crosses lines that shouldn't be crossed. There are things in my reports that haven't been disclosed to you or to regulatory authorities. Intrigued, despite his caution, Ethan agreed to meet at a cafe in neighboring Preston County, beyond Blackwood's immediate sphere of influence. Upon arriving, he found Parker already seated in a corner booth, a man in his early 50s with the weathered appearance of someone who spent considerable time in the field rather than corporate offices. I'm risking my career by talking to you, Parker began without preamble after Ethan joined him. But I can't be part of what's happening anymore. Blackwood is deliberately misrepresenting critical information about both the pipeline project and the oil deposit under your property. What kind of misrepresentation? Ethan asked, studying the geologist carefully for signs of deception or manipulation. The pipeline doesn't need to cross your property, Parker stated flatly. There are two alternative routes that add minimal cost and actually reduce environmental impact. Blackwood rejected them specifically to create pretext for acquiring the Wilcox Ranch because of the oil, Ethan surmised. Parker nodded. The deposit is significantly larger than you probably realize. My comprehensive assessment, which Blackwood has kept strictly internal, estimates reserves between 5 and 7 million barrels with exceptionally high-quality crude characteristics. He slid a flash drive across the table. These are my complete findings, including three-dimensional mapping of the entire formation. At current market prices, we're talking about 20–30 million in recoverable oil. Ethan absorbed this information with outward calm that masked his internal shock. Why would Blackwood go to such lengths rather than simply making a fair offer based on the actual value? It's not just about money, Parker replied. It's about family legacy and corporate control. The deposit extends beyond your property onto adjacent parcels that Titan already controls. Blackwood needs your land to efficiently extract the entire formation without regulatory complications. The geologist hesitated before continuing. There's something else you should know. I found documentation in our historical archives suggesting Titan's interest in this property dates back to its founding. Robert Blackwood apparently transferred the land to Titan's predecessor company shortly after foreclosure, then back to private ownership, when initial testing techniques couldn't confirm the deposit's value. The property has changed hands multiple times since then, but always with Titan maintaining right of first refusal, until the recent tax auction that transferred ownership to you without their knowledge. This revelation completed the picture Ethan had been assembling from fragmented historical documents. Robert Blackwood had apparently orchestrated the foreclosure with specific knowledge of potential oil deposits, then maintained corporate control through hidden ownership structures for decades. Blackwood isn't just trying to acquire valuable property, Parker concluded. He's attempting to protect a family secret that could have significant legal implications if fully exposed. Your purchase disrupted decades of careful control. Their meeting concluded, Parker offered one final insight. Tomorrow morning, Blackwood is meeting with the Titan board to discuss final resolution of the Wilcox Ranch situation. Whatever he's planning goes beyond the offer you've received. Be careful. Driving back toward Riverdale, Ethan's mind processed the implications of Parker's revelations. The situation had evolved beyond negotiation over property value into something with moral and potentially legal dimensions that transcended simple business transaction. His deliberation was interrupted by urgent call from Sheriff Holbrook. Ethan, there's a fire at the Wilcox Ranch. Fire department is responding, but the old house is fully engaged. You need to get out here. Arriving at his property 30 minutes later, Ethan found the ranch house consumed by flames, despite the rural fire department's efforts to contain the blaze. Sheriff Holbrook approached as Ethan exited his truck, expression grim beneath his official composure. This wasn't accidental. the sheriff stated without preamble. Fire chief found evidence of accelerant around the perimeter. Someone wanted. This place burned to the ground. As Ethan watched the historical structure collapse in flames, the timing seemed too convenient to be coincidence. The documents he had discovered, evidence of Robert Blackwood's questionable foreclosure practices and knowledge of oil potential, were now ash, along with any other historical evidence the building might have contained. I made copies of the most important documents, Ethan said, more to himself than the sheriff, but anything else that might have been hidden there is gone forever. This crosses a line from corporate pressure tactics to criminal activity, Holbrook observed. Arson investigation will be thorough, with state authorities involved given the circumstances. As emergency responders continued battling the fire, Ethan's phone rang again, Richard Blackwood himself, calling directly for the first time since their confrontation on the property. "Mr. Caldwell, I've just been informed about the unfortunate fire at the ranch house," Blackwood's voice carried. Practice concern that didn't mask underlying tension. Truly regrettable loss of historical structure. This emphasizes the vulnerability of isolated properties to unfortunate incidents. The implied threat beneath the superficial sympathy was unmistakable. "Are you calling to express condolences? Or deliver a message, Mr. Blackwood?" Ethan asked, maintaining composure despite rising anger. "Merely to remind you that our offer expires tomorrow," Blackwood replied smoothly. "Given tonight's unfortunate development, perhaps reconsideration is appropriate. $500,000 provides opportunity to start fresh without further complications. I'll let you know my decision tomorrow," Ethan responded, revealing nothing of his internal reaction to this thinly veiled intimidation. As he ended the call, Ethan surveyed the burning remains of the ranch house with newfound clarity. What had begun as sentimental reclamation of family legacy had evolved into something approaching moral obligation. The property represented not just potential wealth, but opportunity to correct historical injustice perpetuated across generations. With resolute determination, Ethan made 3 calls before leaving the property, first to Miguel, then to Catherine Winters at the Attorney General's office, and finally to Mason Parker. By morning, the pieces would be in place for a confrontation beyond anything Richard Blackwood had anticipated when he first learned of Ethan's modest $500 purchase. The executive boardroom of Titan Energy fell silent as Mason Parker slammed the complete geological survey report onto the polished conference table. "The actual oil reserve under the Wilcox Ranch is worth over $30 million, not the $8 million you've been reporting to the board." CEO Richard Blackwood's face drained of color as his senior geologist continued. "And I've provided copies of these findings, along with documentation of your father's fraudulent foreclosure, to both Mr. Caldwell and the State Attorney General's office. This decades-long deception ends today." The morning after the ranch house fire, Ethan arrived at his farm before dawn. Sleep had been impossible following the previous night's events, his mind working through implications and possibilities with relentless intensity. By first light, he had formulated an approach that went beyond simple negotiation towards something approaching justice, not just for himself, but for the community that had suffered under the Blackwood family's influence for generations. Sarah found him in the office reviewing documents they had fortunately kept at the farm, rather than the now destroyed ranch house. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed, placing a much-needed cup of coffee beside him. "Too much to process," Ethan acknowledged, "but I think I see a path forward that goes beyond accepting or rejecting Blackwood's offer." His explanation was interrupted by Miguel's arrival, the attorney carrying several folders of legal documents prepared through the night. "Everything's ready," he confirmed, "though I still think you're taking an enormous risk with this approach. Sometimes the right path isn't the safest one," Ethan replied. gathering the materials for the meeting ahead. The Blackwoods have been manipulating this community for decades. Accepting their money, even $500,000, would make me complicit in that system. The Titan Energy headquarters dominated downtown Riverton, its 20-story glass, and tower casting long morning shadows across surrounding buildings. In the executive parking area, Richard Blackwood emerged from his Mercedes, confidence evident in every measured movement despite the pressure he faced. Today's board meeting would either cement his control over the Wilcox situation or raise uncomfortable questions about his handling of the increasingly complicated acquisition. Bradford Reynolds, the company's chief legal counsel, met him at the executive elevator. "The board's already assembled," he reported. "Several members have expressed concern about the escalating situation with the Caldwell property. They'll be satisfied once I present our resolution strategy," Blackwood replied, with practiced assurance. "The situation will be resolved by day's end." "There's something else," Reynolds added as the elevator ascended. Mason Parker requested time at the beginning of the meeting to present updated geological findings, said it's critical information the board needs before making any decisions. Blackwood's expression tightened slightly. "Parker's been increasingly problematic. Perhaps it's time to re-evaluate his position after this project concludes." The executive boardroom occupied the tower's top floor, offering panoramic views of the surrounding region, a physical manifestation of Titan Energy's dominance of the local economy. The company's board members represented old money and influence. Throughout the state, many with family connections extending back generations alongside the Blackwoods. As Blackwood entered, conversations quieted respectfully. Despite recent concerns, his position as third-generation CEO carried substantial weight among people who valued legacy and tradition. He took his seat at the head of the table with practiced authority, nodding to Mason Parker, who stood ready with presentation materials. "Before we address the Wilcox Ranch acquisition, Mr. Parker has updated geological findings to share," Blackwood announced, his tone suggesting routine procedure rather than potentially consequential revelation. Parker connected his laptop to the presentation system with deliberate calm that masked his internal tension. The senior geologist had spent 15 years building his reputation at Titan Energy, a career now balanced against ethical considerations he could no longer ignore. "My team has completed comprehensive analysis of the geological formation beneath the Wilcox Ranch property," Parker began, displaying three-dimensional imaging of subsurface structures. "Our initial assessment identified a significant oil deposit, but recent core samples and extended mapping reveal a formation substantially larger and more valuable than previously reported to this board." The presentation that followed detailed not just the expanded size of the deposit, but its exceptional quality and accessibility, factors that dramatically increased its potential value. Parker's methodical explanation built toward a conclusion that shifted uncomfortably in the room as board members processed the implications. Based on current market prices and extraction costs, the recoverable oil within this formation represents potential value between $25 to $30 million, Parker concluded, significantly higher than the $8 to $10 million estimate previously provided in acquisition briefings. Board member Victoria Harrington, known for her direct approach, leaned forward. "Why such dramatic discrepancy between initial estimates and current valuation?" Before Parker could respond, Blackwood intervened smoothly. "Geological assessment is inherently iterative. Initial estimates are appropriately conservative until confirmed through additional testing. With respect, that doesn't explain this level of discrepancy," Parker countered with unexpected firmness. "My comprehensive assessment was completed 3 weeks ago and submitted through appropriate channels. The findings I've just presented should have been available during previous board discussions." The challenge created palpable tension. Blackwood's expression remained controlled, despite the clear insubordination. Perhaps we can address internal communication procedures after resolving the more pressing acquisition matter. Mr. Reynolds has prepared updated ownership transfer documentation based on our latest offer. Before we proceed, Parker continued, ignoring the implicit instruction to conclude his presentation, there's additional historical context the board should consider. He displayed a new slide showing historical documentation. These records indicate Titan's interest in this specific property dates back to the company's founding under Robert Blackwood, following his acquisition of the land through bank foreclosure in 1952. The historical connection raised eyebrows among several board members. Victoria Harrington's expression sharpened with particular interest. Are you suggesting our current acquisition efforts connect to the company's founding? The documentation indicates Robert Blackwood had geological reports suggesting oil potential before foreclosing on the Caldwell family farm during the 1952 drought, Parker confirmed. The property has changed hands multiple times since, but always with Titan, maintaining connection through various legal mechanisms until the recent tax auction that transferred ownership to Ethan Caldwell without company knowledge. The boardroom door opened before Blackwood could respond, his executive assistant entering with evident discomfort at interrupting the meeting. Excuse the interruption, sir, but there are representatives from the State Attorney General's office in the lobby requesting immediate meeting with the board regarding the Wilcox Ranch situation. Blackwood's composed exterior showed momentary fracture, a flicker of calculation and concern crossing his features before the confident mask returned. Inform them the board is in closed session and will respond through appropriate channels. After our meeting concludes, they've presented this, the assistant replied, handing him an official document. It appears to be some form of emergency injunction. As Blackwood reviewed the document, his controlled demeanor slipped further. This is absurd. They can't possibly... He stopped himself, recalibrating before addressing the increasingly concerned board. It appears the Attorney General's office is overreaching its authority based on spurious allegations regarding our acquisition processes. Bradford Reynolds reviewed the document with professional efficiency, his expression growing increasingly grave. This isn't standard procedural intervention, he observed. Their alleging pattern of corporate misconduct spanning decades, with the Wilcox property as central example. He looked up with the solemn assessment of experienced counsel. Given the specific allegations and supporting documentation referenced, I would strongly advise meeting with them immediately rather than escalating through rejection. The recommendation from his trusted legal advisor left Blackwood with limited options before the watchful board. Very well. Have them escorted to conference room 3. We'll address their concerns promptly. As Bradford Reynolds departed to coordinate the unexpected meeting, Blackwood attempted to regain control of the increasingly problematic situation. Let's recess briefly while I address this regulatory overreach. We'll reconvene to complete our Wilcox Ranch decision afterward. I believe we should hear these allegations as a full board, Victoria Harrington countered, support for her position evident in several members' expressions. If there are legitimate concerns about historical practices connected to current acquisition efforts, the board has fiduciary responsibility to understand them directly. The challenge to his authority from a respected board member created perilous situation for Blackwood. Refusing would suggest he was hiding information. Agreeing meant losing control of the narrative he had carefully constructed. Of course, he conceded with practiced graciousness that masked his concern. Transparency is always our policy. Have the Attorney General's representatives join us here. The minutes that followed created excruciating tension as board members reviewed Parker's geological findings while awaiting the unexpected visitors. Blackwood maintained outward composure while inwardly calculating damage control strategies for what was rapidly evolving beyond his carefully structured plans. When the boardroom door opened again, Catherine Winters entered with two colleagues carrying document cases. What Blackwood hadn't anticipated, what sent visible shock through his carefully maintained facade, was the person who followed them, Ethan Caldwell, accompanied by Miguel Gonzalez. "What is the meaning of this?" Blackwood demanded, professional, courtesy straining against evident alarm. "This is a closed board meeting. Mr. Caldwell has no standing to—" "Mr. Caldwell is here at our request as the complainant in our investigation," Catherine Winters interrupted with professional authority that silenced further objection. "Thank you for accommodating this emergency session. I'm Catherine Winters, Special Prosecutor with the State Attorney General's Office. These are serious matters that couldn't wait for standard procedural timelines." The boardroom's atmosphere transformed as the newcomers arranged materials at the opposite end of the table from Blackwood. Board members watched with expressions ranging from concern to interest as power dynamics visibly shifted within their normally controlled environment. The Attorney General's Office has been investigating potential corporate misconduct by Titan Energy regarding land acquisition practices and regulatory compliance, Winters began, her tone balancing professional courtesy with unmistakable authority. "Recent events surrounding the Wilcox Ranch property have accelerated our timeline by providing documentary evidence of potentially criminal activity spanning multiple decades." The prosecutor proceeded to outline an investigation that extended far beyond Ethan's individual property dispute, using documents provided by Mason Parker alongside historical records salvaged before the ranch house fire. She described pattern of manipulative land acquisition dating back to Robert Blackwood's banking practices and continuing through Titan Energy's corporate expansion. Most concerning are indications that last night's arson at the Wilcox Ranch may connect directly to efforts to destroy historical documentation, potentially damaging to Titan Energy, Winters continued, creating visible discomfort among board members. "We're not making formal allegations regarding responsibility for that criminal act, but the timing and targeted nature of the fire raises serious questions this board should consider." Blackwood maintained rigid composure through the presentation, though the occasional tightening of his jaw betrayed mounting tension. When Victoria Harrington directed question to him regarding his knowledge of the property's historical connection to his father's banking activities, his response carried defensive edge beneath professional phrasing. "My father's banking practices occurred decades before my leadership of this company," he deflected. "Current acquisition efforts relate solely to necessary right-of-way for critical infrastructure project, not historical matters beyond relevant business considerations." "Yet you personally offered $100,000 for property officially valued under $1,000, Ethan observed, speaking for the first time. "And your company escalated to $500,000 yesterday for land you claimed was only needed for pipeline access." The direct challenge from someone Blackwood had consistently underestimated created visible crack in his composure. Before he could respond, Mason Parker added damaging context. The pipeline design, specifically routed through the Wilcox property, was selected despite two viable alternatives with lower environmental impact and comparable cost structures. Those alternatives were rejected without standard comparative analysis in project documentation. The combined revelations created palpable shift in the boardroom atmosphere. Victoria Harrington exchanged glances with several other members before addressing Catherine Winters directly. "What exactly is the Attorney General's office proposing regarding this situation? We're prepared to launch formal investigation into potentially criminal activities, including fraud, corrupt influence of public officials, and conspiracy related to the Wilcox Ranch and similar acquisitions, Winters replied. However, we're also authorized to discuss alternative resolution that addresses systemic issues while avoiding protracted legal proceedings that could damage many beyond those directly responsible. The implied opportunity for negotiated settlement, rather than criminal prosecution, created subtle relief among board members, though Blackwood's expression revealed calculation rather than acceptance. This sounds remarkably like prosecutorial overreach to leverage corporate settlement, he observed with dangerous calm. A concerning approach from state officials. Actually, Miguel Gonzalez interjected, Mr. Caldwell has proposed resolution framework that addresses historical injustices while creating positive outcomes for the broader community. The attorney slid document folders to each board member. Rather than pursuing maximum personal compensation or punitive action against Titan Energy, he's offering partnership approach that acknowledges both the property's value and the company's regional importance. As board members reviewed the proposal, Ethan explained his vision directly. The oil beneath the Wilcox Ranch represents significant value, but developing it properly requires resources beyond what I can personally access. Rather than simply selling to Titan Energy or partnering with competing corporation, I'm proposing community benefit structure that addresses historical injustices while creating sustainable regional development. The proposal outlined formation of new development entity, jointly owned by Ethan, Titan Energy, and Community Foundation, representing families affected by questionable historical acquisition practices. Profits would be shared proportionally, with significant percentage dedicated to environmental restoration, educational programs, and economic development throughout the region. This approach provides Titan Energy access to valuable resource while acknowledging historical context of the land's acquisition, Ethan continued. More importantly, it transforms potential conflict into collaborative opportunity that benefits the entire community. The innovative proposal created thoughtful silence among board members. Bradford Reynolds, returning to the boardroom during Ethan's presentation, reviewed the documents with professional assessment that couldn't entirely mask his surprise at the unexpected approach. From legal perspective, he finally offered, this framework potentially resolves multiple areas of liability while preserving Titan's operational objectives. The proposed profit distribution acknowledges the deposit's value while creating positive community relations that could benefit future projects throughout the region. Victoria Harrington studied Ethan with new respect. Most people in your position would simply leverage these revelations for maximum personal gain. This proposal suggests different priorities. My grandfather always said true wealth comes from what you build, not what you acquire, Ethan replied. This land holds personal significance because of family history, but its greatest value lies in potential to create something meaningful for the entire community. The discussion that followed transformed the confrontational atmosphere into something approaching collaborative problem-solving. Board members asked detailed questions about implementation structure, profit distribution, and governance mechanisms, their engagement suggesting genuine interest beyond mere damage control. Throughout this exchange, Richard Blackwood remained conspicuously silent, his expression revealing complex calculation beneath superficial attentiveness. When Victoria Harrington finally directed specific question regarding his position on the proposal, his response revealed careful recalibration rather than genuine transformation. The framework has intriguing elements worth exploring, he acknowledged, with practiced diplomatic phrasing, though substantial refinement would be necessary before formal consideration, particularly regarding operational control and decision-making authority. His attempt to reclaim control through procedural qualification met unexpected resistance from his own board. I believe we should establish working committee to develop implementation details immediately, Victoria countered, with representatives from all stakeholder groups and independent oversight to ensure equitable structure. The suggestion and implied limitation of Blackwood's direct control received visible support from multiple board members, creating unmistakable shift in governance dynamics that transcended the specific property dispute. What had begun as routine acquisition matter had evolved into fundamental reassessment of corporate leadership and historical practices, with implications extending far beyond the Wilcox Ranch. As the meeting concluded with formal authorization to develop detailed implementation plan based on Ethan's framework, Catherine Winters confirmed the Attorney General's office would suspend active investigation pending good faith progress on the proposed resolution. The outcome represented significant victory for all parties, except perhaps Richard Blackwood himself, whose authority and judgment had been subtly but meaningfully diminished through the process. In the executive lobby afterward, Victoria Harrington approached Ethan with professional respect that couldn't mask her curiosity. That was remarkably effective negotiation from someone with no corporate background, she observed. What made you propose partnership rather than simply leveraging your position for personal gain? I grew up watching corporate interests extract value from our community without creating lasting benefit, Ethan replied. This seemed opportunity to demonstrate different approach, one that acknowledges interdependence rather than exploitation. Well, it certainly created significant shift within Titan's leadership dynamics, Victoria noted, with subtle indication toward Richard Blackwood, who stood in tense conversation with Bradford Reynolds near the executive elevator. Though I suspect our CEO may require adjustment period to appreciate the transformation you've initiated. The predicted adjustment manifested sooner than anyone anticipated. 2 weeks later, Titan Energy announced significant leadership reorganization, with Richard Blackwood transitioning to advisory role, while Victoria Harrington assumed interim CEO position pending permanent leadership selection. The carefully worded press release cited strategic realignment to address evolving regional partnerships and community investment initiatives, corporate language that barely masked the governance revolution Ethan's $500 purchase had ultimately triggered. 6 months later, Ethan stood at the edge of the Wilcox Ranch property, watching as specialized equipment extracted core samples from the promising oil formation below. The Wilcox Community Partnership, the entity created through his proposal, had begun preliminary development work with environmental safeguards exceeding regulatory requirements and profit-sharing structure that would benefit generations throughout the region. Sarah approached from the monitoring station, where she oversaw environmental compliance for the project. First production estimates are even better than projected, she reported, with evident satisfaction. The Community Foundation should receive initial funding distribution within 6 months. The foundation had already begun accepting applications for educational scholarships, sustainable agriculture initiatives, and small business development programs, transforming potential personal windfall into community resource with lasting impact beyond simple financial distribution. Your grandfather would be proud, Sarah added, knowing the personal significance behind Ethan's unconventional approach. You've done more than reclaim family land. You've transformed what it represents for the entire community. As they watched specialized equipment carefully extract test samples without disturbing surrounding landscape, techniques far beyond what would have been implemented under Blackwood's aggressive development approach, Ethan reflected on the unexpected journey from impulse purchase to community transformation. The $500 investment had ultimately yielded value far beyond the millions of dollars beneath the surface. It had created opportunity to address historical injustice, transform corporate practices that had dominated the region for generations, and demonstrate alternative approach to resource development based on shared benefit rather than concentrated profit. Sheriff Holbrook's patrol vehicle approached along the newly improved access road, the older man having become regular visitor to the development site. "Quite an operation you've got here," he observed, joining them at the observation point, "quite different from what Titan originally planned." "Different leadership creates different priorities," Ethan acknowledged, referring to Victoria Harrington's transformation of Titan's approach throughout the region following Blackwood's departure. The new CEO had embraced collaborative development model with surprising enthusiasm, implementing similar community partnership approaches across multiple projects. "Heard from Richard Blackwood lately?" the sheriff asked with characteristic directness that barely masked his satisfaction regarding the former CEO's diminished influence. "He's established consulting practice in Houston," Ethan replied, "apparently focusing on strategic acquisition optimization for energy companies, though with somewhat limited client roster according to industry publications." The sheriff's chuckle carried no sympathy. "Funny how things work out. His father took this land through questionable foreclosure 70 years ago, thinking he was building dynasty. Now his son's greatest legacy might be demonstrating what not to do in corporate leadership." As sunset painted the landscape with golden light, Ethan surveyed the property that had changed not just his life, but the community's future trajectory. The dilapidated ranch house had been rebuilt using historical photographs as reference, not as personal residence, but as community center housing, educational programs, and regional development initiatives funded through the partnership. What had begun as sentimental reclamation of family legacy had evolved into something with impact, extending far beyond anything he had imagined when placing that modest $500 bid at the county tax auction. The true value of his purchase had never really been the millions of dollars beneath the surface, but the opportunity to demonstrate that even in business, approaches based on fairness and shared benefit could succeed where exploitation and concentration of wealth ultimately failed. Catherine Winters had perhaps summarized it best during their last meeting. "You've done something remarkable here, Mr. Caldwell. You've transformed potential personal fortune into community legacy. In doing so, you've not just reclaimed land your family lost, you've redefined what value really means." 5 years after Ethan Caldwell's momentous $500 purchase at a tax auction, the transformed Wilcox Ranch hosted its annual community celebration. Children raced across green lawns that had once been barren dust, while families gathered beneath shade trees planted during the property's restoration. At the center of it all stood Ethan, now 41, watching with quiet satisfaction as Jacob Caldwell Memorial Scholarship recipients shared their educational journeys with community elders who remembered when the Blackwood name had represented oppression rather than opportunity. Before we conclude this remarkable story of perseverance and transformation, tell us in the comments how this journey has inspired you. If you've enjoyed this series, make sure you're subscribed, because next week we begin an incredible new story about a forgotten small town that discovered a priceless historical treasure hidden in plain sight for over a century. The discovery of oil beneath the Wilcox Ranch had indeed transformed the economic landscape of Dry Creek County, but not in the way anyone might have predicted when Ethan first placed his modest bid on the abandoned property. The Wilcox Community Partnership, now in its 5th year of operation, had established a development model that challenged conventional practices throughout the energy industry while creating sustainable prosperity across the region. "I still can't believe how much has changed," observed Sheriff Holbrook, now retired but still a respected community figure. He stood beside Ethan near the rebuilt ranch house that served as headquarters for educational programs and community initiatives funded through the partnership. 5 years ago, this place was desolate wasteland everyone avoided. Now it's the heart of the county. Amazing what people can accomplish when prosperity is shared rather than concentrated, Ethan replied, watching children explore interactive exhibits explaining sustainable energy practices in the education center that occupied the ranch house's ground floor. The transformation extended far beyond the physical property. Initial oil production had indeed confirmed Mason Parker's assessments. Nearly 6 million barrels of high-quality crude extracted with minimal environmental impact using innovative techniques that prioritize conservation alongside profit. But the distribution of that wealth had created impact more profound than mere financial metrics could capture. Under Victoria Harrington's leadership, Titan Energy had embraced the community partnership model pioneered at the Wilcox Ranch, implementing similar approaches across multiple projects throughout the region. The company's corporate culture had transformed from aggressive acquisition toward collaborative development, creating unexpected competitive advantage through improved community relations and environmental practices that anticipated regulatory requirements rather than resisting them. The community foundation established through the partnership had distributed over $20 million toward educational programs, environmental restoration, and economic development initiatives that benefited even the most vulnerable residents. Scholarships enabled rural students to pursue higher education without crippling debt. Small business grants created economic diversification beyond energy dependence, and environmental restoration projects healed decades of industrial damage, while creating sustainable infrastructure for future generations. Most remarkably, the model had spread beyond Dry Creek County, with energy companies throughout the state implementing variations of the Wilcox Partnership approach. The Caldwell model, as industry publications had labeled it, was transforming corporate practices that had remained unchanged for decades, proof that ethical business approaches could create competitive advantage alongside community benefit. As Ethan moved through the celebration, greeting neighbors and partnership stakeholders, he spotted Dr. Elena Reyes speaking with a group of scholarship recipients near the sustainability exhibits. The geologist's initial soil analysis had proven crucial in understanding the property's potential, and she had since become director of the partnership's educational initiatives. These students are developing monitoring techniques that could revolutionize production safety, she reported as Ethan joined them. Their research project is already attracting attention from regulatory agencies and industry partners. The students, children of farmers and service workers who might never have accessed higher education without the partnership scholarships, explained their innovations with confidence, born from knowing their ideas were taken seriously regardless of their backgrounds. Their project exemplified the partnership's core philosophy, that community prosperity required investment in human potential alongside responsible resource development. Any word from our friends at Covenant Energy about adopting these monitoring protocols? Ethan asked, referring to the regional competitor that had initially approached him about purchasing his mineral rights after the partnership's success. Became evident. Their new environmental director is reviewing the proposal, Elena confirmed. Sarah's meeting with them next week to discuss implementation timeline. Sarah Martinez had evolved from skeptical farm manager to passionate advocate for the partnership model, now serving as Chief Sustainability Officer while overseeing both the original Caldwell farm operations and environmental compliance across partnership projects. Her practical expertise and unwavering integrity had made her respected voice throughout the industry, proof that agricultural and energy interests could align when approached through collaborative rather than competitive frameworks. As afternoon progressed toward evening, the community celebration transitioned to formal recognition program held beneath string lights in the central gathering area. Local officials, industry representatives and community members assembled to honor particularly impactful initiatives developed through the partnership over the previous year. When Ethan took the podium to present the annual Community Impact Award, an unexpected figure at the back of the gathering caught his attention. Richard Blackwood himself, observing the proceedings with unreadable expression. The former Titan Energy CEO had not returned to Dry Creek County since his resignation 5 years earlier, his presence creating ripple of surprised whispers among those who recognized him. Ethan acknowledged the unexpected visitor with brief nod before continuing his presentation, highlighting the remarkable achievements of a rural healthcare initiative that had expanded medical services throughout the county using mobile clinics funded through partnership resources. The project exemplified how oil wealth was creating sustainable infrastructure beyond traditional energy industry boundaries, addressing community needs that had remained unmet for generations. As formal presentations concluded and attendees enjoyed, dinner prepared by local restaurants supported through partnership small business grants, Richard Blackwood approached Ethan with the measured caution of someone uncertain of his reception. "Impressive transformation," the former CEO observed, gesturing toward the thriving community gathering. "Hardly recognizable as the same property. People can accomplish remarkable things when given proper resources and respect," Ethan replied, neutrally, studying the man whose family had shaped the region's history through very different approaches than what the celebration represented. Blackwood had aged visibly in the 5 years since their confrontation in the Titan Energy boardroom. Though still carrying himself with inherited confidence, something in his bearing suggested diminished certainty, a man whose fundamental assumptions had been challenged by outcomes he hadn't anticipated. "My consulting firm has been studying your partnership model," he acknowledged, surprising Ethan with this unexpected disclosure. "Several clients are implementing variations of your profit-sharing structure and community foundation approach. The results are proving instructive." The admission represented remarkable evolution from the man who had once dismissed community benefit as irrelevant to corporate objectives. "The model works because it acknowledges interdependence rather than exploitation," Ethan observed. "Something your father's generation of business leaders never fully recognized." Blackwood's expression revealed complex reaction to this reference to his family legacy. "I've been researching my father's business practices, particularly regarding the original Caldwell property foreclosure," he said after brief hesitation. "The documented manipulation of loan terms during the drought. It wasn't isolated incident. It was apparently standard practice." This acknowledgement of historical injustice from the man whose family had perpetrated it created momentary speechlessness for Ethan. "What prompted that research?" he finally asked. "Victoria Harrington insisted on full historical audit when she assumed permanent CEO position," Blackwood replied. "The findings were enlightening regarding the true foundations of what I had always considered exemplary business empire." Before Ethan could respond to this unexpected revelation, they were joined by Catherine Wells, the current chair of the Community Foundation Board and granddaughter of farmer who had lost land to Robert Blackwood's bank during the same drought that had claimed the Caldwell property. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged with professional courtesy that couldn't entirely mask historical awareness, "your visit is unexpected." "I'm here in research capacity," he explained, "documenting the partnership model for case study on alternative development approaches." Catherine's expression reflected polite skepticism, interesting focus given your historical approach to resource development. "Perhaps because of that history," Blackwood replied with surprising candor. "Success creates responsibility to understand practices that prove more effective than one's own approaches." This acknowledgement of the partnership's success from the man who had most aggressively opposed its creation represented significant evolution beyond corporate defensiveness. The conversation that followed revealed Blackwood's apparent transformation. From exploitation-focused executive to analyst of collaborative development models, though whether driven by genuine ethical reconsideration or mere pragmatic adaptation remained unclear. As Blackwood departed with research materials provided by the Foundation staff, Catherine observed, 5 years ago, he was threatening your life and burning down historical buildings to protect family secrets. Now he's studying your model as best practice example. That's either remarkable transformation or sophisticated co-option strategy. Perhaps both, Ethan acknowledged. But either way, the partnership model is reshaping practices his family established over generations. That's meaningful progress, regardless of his personal motivations. As evening deepened and celebration continued with music and dancing beneath the stars, Ethan found quiet moment with Sarah near the memorial garden established to honor community members who hadn't lived to see the region's transformation. Among the commemorative plantings stood simple stone marker for Jacob Caldwell, Ethan's grandfather, whose stories of family land had inspired the purchase that changed everything. Your grandfather would be amazed by what you've accomplished, Sarah observed, knowing how deeply those childhood stories had influenced Ethan's approach to the property and its development. He always believed this land held value beyond what others could see, Ethan replied, though I doubt even he imagined anything like this. The this encompassed far more than the physical transformation of once-abandoned ranch into thriving community center. It included scholarship recipients who would become first college graduates in their families, small business owners who had established sustainable enterprises through partnership grants, and environmental restoration projects that had healed decades of industrial damage throughout the region. Most significantly, it included fundamental shift in power dynamics that had governed the community for generations. Where corporations had once extracted resources while concentrating wealth among small ownership class, the partnership model ensured prosperity reached even the most vulnerable community members through education, healthcare, and economic opportunity that transcended traditional class boundaries. The celebration continued late into the evening, community members of all backgrounds sharing meals, conversations, and dances in celebration that reflected more than mere economic success. What they commemorated was the community itself, its resilience, interdependence, and capacity for transformation when resources were distributed with justice rather than concentrated through exploitation. The following morning found Ethan at his original farm, reviewing operations with the management team that had expanded as the partnership's success created resources for agricultural innovation alongside energy development. The integration of sustainable farming practices with responsible energy production represented physical manifestation of the partnership's core philosophy that prosperity required balance rather than extraction across all resource categories. Miguel Gonzalez arrived for their scheduled meeting regarding expansion of the partnership model to neighboring county, where similar community foundation was being established. The attorney's practice had evolved alongside the partnership, focusing on implementing collaborative development structures that balanced corporate interests with community benefit across multiple industries. The Hartwell County Commissioners approved the Foundation Charter yesterday, Miguel reported as they settled in Ethan's office. They're eager to implement partnership approach for the new manufacturing development on their eastern border. Manufacturing rather than energy, Ethan noted with satisfaction. Further proof the model transcends specific industries. The core principles apply regardless of resource type, Miguel agreed. Shared prosperity, environmental responsibility, and community governance create sustainable outcomes across sectors. Their discussion of implementation details was interrupted by unexpected visitor, Mason Parker, whose courageous testimony in the Titan Energy boardroom had proven crucial to establishing the partnership 5 years earlier. The geologist had departed the company alongside Richard Blackwood, though in dramatically different circumstances, and with considerably more respect from colleagues and community alike. "Sorry to interrupt," Parker apologized from the doorway, "but I thought you should see this immediately." He placed newspaper on Ethan's desk, open to business section, featuring prominent headline: Blackwood releases comprehensive study of Wilcox partnership model, acknowledges transformative impact on energy industry practices. The article detailed 30-page analysis Richard Blackwood had published through prestigious business journal, documenting the Wilcox Community Partnership's operational structure, profit distribution mechanisms, and governance frameworks with unexpected objectivity. Most remarkably, the study acknowledged superior outcomes of partnership approach compared to traditional corporate models across multiple metrics: profitability, environmental compliance, and community benefit. He actually analyzed the data objectively, Parker observed with evident surprise. There's no spin or corporate defensiveness, just straightforward acknowledgement that the partnership model outperforms traditional approaches on virtually every meaningful metric. Ethan scanned the article, equally surprised by Blackwood's apparent intellectual honesty regarding model that had directly challenged his family's multi-generational approach to business. The concluding quote seemed particularly significant. The Wilcox Partnership represents paradigm shift in resource development by demonstrating that shared prosperity creates sustainable advantage compared to concentrated profit models. The implications extend beyond energy sector to fundamental reconsideration of corporate-community relationships across all industries. Remarkable evolution from man who once called community benefit irrelevant distraction from core business objectives, Miguel observed, though I notice he never directly acknowledges his own opposition to the model's implementation, or his family's historical exploitation of the communities now benefiting from the partnership, Parker added. The analysis is technically honest without being personally accountable, still represents significant progress, Ethan noted. 5 years ago, he was willing to commit arson to prevent the model from being implemented. Now he's documenting its success for business audiences who might never otherwise consider alternative approaches. The publication indeed represented important milestone in the partnership's influence beyond regional boundaries. Blackwood's analysis would reach corporate audiences typically insulated from community-centered development models, potentially accelerating adoption of collaborative approaches throughout industries traditionally resistant to such frameworks. Later that afternoon, Catherine Winters visited the farm to discuss the study's implications for ongoing regulatory reforms. Her office was promoting at state level. The prosecutor had leveraged the partnership's success to advocate for statutory changes that incentivized community benefit structures across multiple industries, creating systemic transformation beyond what individual corporate practices could achieve. Blackwood's study adds credibility beyond what our regulatory advocacy alone could accomplish, Catherine acknowledged. When former CEO, known for aggressive profit maximization documents, superior outcomes from community partnership model, even the most resistant legislators take notice. Has he reached out to your office regarding the historical documents we uncovered before the fire? Ethan asked, curious whether Blackwood's apparent evolution extended to accountability for his family's past actions. Not directly, Catherine replied, though he hasn't opposed our efforts to create restitution framework for families affected by his father's predatory lending practices. His silence represents tacit acceptance, if not explicit accountability. The conversation shifted toward upcoming legislative session where statutory changes would be considered to formalize community partnership structures within state business codes, creating legal framework that incentivized collaborative approaches through tax benefits, regulatory streamlining, and priority access to development resources typically reserved for traditional corporate entities. The Wilcox model is becoming legal template for next-generation business structures, Catherine explained. What began as resolution to specific property dispute is evolving into statutory framework that could transform development practices statewide. This expansion from individual project to systemic reform represented fulfillment of vision that had gradually evolved from Ethan's initial purchase. What had begun as sentimental reclamation of family legacy had transformed first into community partnership, then regional development model, and now potential statutory framework with implications extending far beyond Dry Creek County or even energy industry specifically. 1 week later, the Wilcox Community Partnership Board gathered for quarterly governance meeting in the conference center that occupied the ranch house's second floor. Representatives from Titan Energy, Community Foundation, and Ethan's Original Ownership Stake reviewed operations with particular attention to proposed expansion into renewable energy development alongside continued oil production. Victoria Harrington, now in her 5th year as Titan Energy CEO, presented analysis supporting integration of solar generation capacity throughout the property's non-production areas. The combined energy approach creates resilience while demonstrating practical transition pathway from fossil fuels toward renewable infrastructure, she explained. We've secured financing structure that maintains existing profit distribution while funding installation over 36-month timeline. The proposal exemplified the partnership's evolving approach, acknowledging oil's continued importance while systematically building renewable capacity that would eventually replace extraction-based energy production. This balanced transition reflected broader philosophy of sustainable development that had become the partnership's hallmark, rejecting false choice between economic vitality and environmental responsibility in favor of integrated approach that honored both priorities. As board members reviewed technical details of the proposed expansion, conversation shifted toward broader implications of Blackwood's published analysis and upcoming legislative consideration of partnership model statutory framework. The potential for their local innovation to reshape development practices throughout the state and potentially beyond created both excitement and sense of responsibility among governance representatives. We have opportunity to establish implementation standards that could guide similar partnerships for generations, noted Catherine Wells from the Community Foundation. The decisions we make regarding governance structure, profit distribution, and community representation will likely become templates for initiatives we never directly interact with. This awareness of broader impact had gradually transformed the partnership's self-conception from local development entity toward model-building organization with responsibility extending beyond immediate operations. Decision-making increasingly considered how specific approaches might translate across different communities, resources, and cultural contexts, creating transferable frameworks rather than situation-specific solutions. Following the governance meeting, Ethan walked the property with Sarah, reviewing planned locations for solar installation while discussing the partnership's evolution from crisis response toward systemic innovation. Their professional relationship had deepened over 5 years of collaboration, with mutual respect evolving into personal connection that balanced their complementary approaches to challenges. Did you ever imagine your impulsive $500 purchase would lead to statewide policy reforms? Sarah asked as they surveyed land that had transformed from abandoned wasteland to thriving community resource. I was just trying to reclaim piece of family history, Ethan acknowledged with characteristic understatement. Everything beyond that came from necessity rather than grand vision. That's precisely why it works, Sarah observed. The model evolved organically from real community needs, rather than being imposed from theoretical framework. Each element developed in response to specific challenges rather than abstract principles. The observation captured essential quality that had made the partnership successful, where more ideologically driven approaches often failed. Its pragmatic responsiveness to actual community circumstances, combined with unwavering commitment to shared prosperity as foundational value. The balance between practical implementation and ethical consistency had created solution that worked in reality rather than merely theory. As sunset painted the landscape in golden light, they paused at Jacob Caldwell's memorial marker in the community garden. Children played nearby on equipment funded through the partnership's education initiatives, their laughter providing living testimony to the model's impact on future generations. Your grandfather told you stories about this land to keep family connection alive, Sarah noted, knowing how deeply those childhood conversations had influenced Ethan's approach to the property. But he created legacy far beyond land ownership. He instilled values that transformed not just this property, but entire communities' relationship with corporate power. The observation captured essential truth about the partnership's origins, that while discovery of oil had created financial opportunity, the values guiding development decisions had come from intergenerational wisdom regarding community interdependence and responsible stewardship. The financial resources were necessary but insufficient. Without ethical framework to guide their distribution, the oil discovery might easily have perpetuated exploitation rather than enabling transformation. As they returned to the ranch house, lights from the education center illuminated pathways, where community members participated in evening programs, financial literacy workshops, technical training for solar installation careers, and cultural events celebrating the region's diverse heritage. The buildings hummed with purposeful activity 7 days a week, physical manifestation of prosperity distributed rather than concentrated. We've created something remarkable here, Sarah acknowledged as they watched participants of all ages engage in community-building activities. But the real test will be whether it continues evolving after oil production eventually declines. That's why the renewable integration matters beyond environmental considerations, Ethan replied. We're building transition pathway rather than extraction endpoint. The community infrastructure we're establishing will continue serving needs long after the oil reserves are depleted. This forward-thinking approach distinguished the partnership from boom and bust cycles that had historically characterized resource-based development throughout the region. Rather than maximizing short-term extraction without consideration for future generations, every decision balanced immediate benefit against long-term community vitality, creating sustainable prosperity rather than temporary wealth concentration. 10. Years after Ethan's momentous purchase, the Wilcox Ranch hosted special ceremony dedicating the completed solar generation facility that now provided clean energy throughout Dry Creek County. The installation, integrated thoughtfully throughout the property's non-production areas, symbolized the partnership's evolution from oil-dependent development toward diversified energy approach that balanced current resources with future sustainability. The ceremony attracted visitors from throughout the state, including legislators considering statutory framework based on the partnership model, corporate executives implementing similar approaches in other industries, and community leaders seeking to replicate the success in their own regions. What had begun as resolution to specific property dispute had evolved into governance innovation with implications extending far beyond Dry Creek County. Among the distinguished attendees was unexpected figure, Richard Blackwood himself now, author of influential book examining how collaborative development models outperformed traditional corporate approaches across multiple industries. His evolution from aggressive CEO to advocate for community partnership frameworks represented perhaps the most remarkable transformation arising from Ethan's $500 purchase and its consequences. Following the formal dedication, Richard approached Ethan with the measured caution of someone aware of complicated history between them. "The integrated energy approach is particularly impressive," he acknowledged, gesturing towards solar arrays thoughtfully positioned throughout the property. "Few development models successfully balance current extraction with future transition. That balance reflects core philosophy that's guided us from the beginning," Ethan replied. "Prosperity only matters if it's sustainable across generations rather than concentrated in single lifetime. A philosophy my family never embraced," Richard acknowledged with surprising candor. "My father and I both prioritized immediate acquisition over long-term relationships, extracting maximum value without considering regenerative capacity of either resources or communities." The admission of fundamental philosophical error from man once dedicated to opposite approach created moment of surprising connection across years of conflict and transformation. "What changed your perspective?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious about evolution that had seemed unlikely during their boardroom confrontation a decade earlier. Richard considered the question with thoughtfulness that would have been uncharacteristic in his corporate leadership days. "Watching this partnership succeed beyond anything my traditional approaches could have achieved," he finally replied. "The data became simply too compelling to ignore. Community-centered development consistently outperforms extraction-based models across every meaningful metric, including long-term profitability." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.